The Food is the Mouth by Sydney Thompson. It was 1 a.m. when he finally stumbled out of the party. The color-shifting lights spilled out onto the campus lawn, mixing with the painted leaves and spiny trees. The air reeked with sweat, alcohol, and marijuana. The other partygoers limped around you back to their dormitories. Most of you had the common sense to keep quiet, lest your max exodus draw the frightful attention of the RAs or campus police. You split from the rest of the crowd early. Your dorm building was closer to the woods surrounding campus, and you didn't want to be in the same crowd that was stumbling back to their rooms. It wouldn't be a great thing if the financial aid office learned where you'd been tonight, after all. It would be even worse if they saw what you had in your hand right now, a half-empty can of cheap off-brand beer. You also didn't want the disappointed phone call from your parents that would come if you did lose your financial aid over something so stupid. You figured if you were going to do something stupid, you might feel smart about it. Your roommate had promised to cover for you if something happened, to swear up and down that you were right there in your Matchbox dorm room. Or if someone dropped by in the night, RA or otherwise, your roommate would swear up and down that you were at the 7-Eleven or something, getting more energy drinks for your shared all-nighter. You were a good enough student that anyone would buy that. Why are you even going to this, though? Your roommate had asked at 8 when you shrugged on your jacket and got ready to head to the frat house. You don't really seem like the party type, you know? You weren't really sure yourself. It wasn't like you had fun. You danced some of the music, distorted from being cranked up all the way in all the speakers in the house. But mostly you wandered through the dark corridors of the frat house, disassociating between the deafening music and the shifting rave lights around the ceiling. When you first walked in, the party had already been going for an hour, all inhibitions checked at the door. One of the girls shoved a half-full beer can in your hand before you could protest, in the same way someone might ask a friend to hold their purse. But she never came back for it, and you knew you had to keep moving in the writhing chaos of drugs, dancing, and debauchery. You'd managed to find a little corner of the house where you could observe the storm, right by one of the back doors to the frat house. You contemplated trying that beer up until some pale guy dressed in clothes that screamed old money approached you. He had a glass of what looked like blood-red wine in his hand, but he spoke with some semblance of sobriety. He had a nice voice, really, dripping with sophistication and grandfatherly wisdom that was out of place on someone who didn't look old enough to drink. Hell, if you knew what economic bullshit he was on about for 10 minutes or so. Luckily, after that point, he went on to terrorize some other partygoer, and you made your escape to the second floor of the frat house. You wandered until you managed to lock yourself in the bathroom and looked out the window at the view of the mountains. It reminded you of your first night on campus. You arrived in the mountain about 2 months after graduation. Your father dropped you in front of the dorms with only a suitcase, a backpack, and a duffel bag as your only shield against the world. You breathed in the mountain air for the first time, and you wondered if you belonged here. You then shrugged and headed up the stairs with your only possessions. You introduced yourself to your roommate as the two of you moved into the little Matchbox room where you would be spending the next year. The two of you became friends, more out of convenience than because you shared any interests or compatible personalities. You both sat at the cafeteria table closest to the window on that first night. You were the farthest from the mass of students descending on the dining hall like locusts. You both looked to the window, a wall of glass overlooking the mountain. The peaks were dark and jagged against the night sky. Take your breath away. Your roommate said the same thing all the flyers and tour guides did. Yeah. You shrugged and looked back to your phone. All your old friends from high school already moved in, and they were having a great time getting ice cream by the ocean. You considered that same coastal campus to the east. But it didn't have the major you wanted, even though you weren't all that sure about that major anyway, but it was practical, and as your father always said, that was the most important thing. You wondered if your old friends thought of you on that first night, and the many more since. Given their Instagram stories and tweets, it was unlikely they'd even given you a second thought since you'd parted ways in June. So many years together had been absolutely special in life. But you try not to think about them too much, after all. You had classes and a brave new world to enter, and that kept you occupied most of the time. You'd fight with your roommate and extracurriculars and attempts at making new friends and networking because college was only 4 years, and then you'd move on just as easily as you did with high school. You went to school, college, then to work. You maybe married, maybe had a kid or 2.5. You raised them, and then you died. It was the course of life, and you would hardly be the one to break it. Still, like the peaks of the mountains in the distance, this loomed over your first semester away at university. A life sentence, then. Maybe that was why you didn't sleep on most nights. Or maybe it was the coffee you chugged to work later and later as the lines of text blurred together and the lines between the dreaming and the waking thinned out of existence. Maybe that was why you came to the party tonight, so that you could pretend that you were having a fun time, just like they were. You could pretend that you broke the cycle. What a waste of time. Tomorrow you did it. You just knew it, and nothing had really made you feel better. In fact, you had spent most of the party in the bathroom or on your phone scrolling through ex-best friend's social media. And you felt more lonely than ever. As you now drew closer to the forest, full of self-pity and dread of what the morning would bring and headaches, hangovers, and regret, that was when you heard the voices for the first time. They came softly on the wind. A chorus of human voices. You looked around, bewildered on how you could have stumbled onto a church in the middle of the woods at the devil's hour. But no one was there. The voices rose, but not loud enough for you to quite understand. There were cadences of languages that were both familiar and not to your ears. The effect was not discordant or cacophonous, as one might have expected. Instead, it all flowed together in the most beautiful and alluring harmony that you have ever heard, then or since. This was something divine beyond your understanding, like physics and God. You weren't about to get yourself in trouble with that. This was the exact kind of thing that separated you from your friends in the first place. You went here because the scholarships were abundant, and it was a chance to graduate without a debt higher than Mount Pisgah nearby. Your friends, on the other hand, did not want to risk the spooky school, as the others in your state had heard of it. That's the thing that stopped you in your tracks. They had left you behind for suspicion. Why not prove that it was nothing to be afraid of? At worst, you would join the legend surrounding Hawthorne College, another unsolved mystery. So you followed the voices, the tugging of the wind. You could not fully explain how or why, but you knew that this was something beyond your understanding, something to be obeyed. When you stumbled onto the forest, you weren't sure exactly where on the mountain wanted you to go. That's when you took too long and you decided to follow it. To a pond in the woods. That was where the woods led you. To a perfectly smooth gray stone like a tomb came out of the water. There were no markings, no explanation for its presence. There, except for what's not. It was there that you saw the spirit of the mountain. There were neither male nor female, with long hair that was green like the trees in the height of summer, overgrown with kudzu and wisteria. Their eyes were the color of stormy skies, their expression inscrutable as they regarded you. I brought a gift, you stammered, in sheer awe of the divine before you. You set the half-empty beer can someone pressed into your hand before you left down at the feet of the spirit. I have no need for gifts such as these. They spoke, and 1,000 voices rang out like the ones that rode the wind. The sentiment is appreciated, but what I require is more arduous. You frowned and kept the beer to yourself. What do you want, then? The spirit smiled. It was as cold as the peak of the mountain in the winter, as warm as the sun on a perfect afternoon. Times have changed. They turned. Moving slow but deliberate, like the shifting of the earth sped up. Follow me. You followed them out of the clearing. Their hair and withered garments rustled along the ground. Their limbs made a grinding sound of rock upon rock as it led you away from your campus. You crossed through a tiny babbling stream, struggling to keep up with its airy and limber movements, much like the birds at sunrise. It was completely at odds with the sounds and the sense of ancient weight upon the spirit's shoulders. And yet something about the spirit's physicality resonated with you all the same. You followed it for such a long time, but not in the sort of trance that kept you at the party. Curiosity sparked inside of you like a fire, and you wanted to know the answers this creature had for you. You wondered so much about the nature of the divine, so many times when you were a child in church, listening to sermons that only the adults seemed to understand. Would anyone in your childhood church, for all their theology, be able to comprehend what they saw before you? Still, as doubt kept in, you kept on forward. The moon was close to the horizon when you passed the last set of pine trees to an outcrop, where you could look over the valley and the Blue Ridge Mountains. It took your breath away, just like your roommate said, just like all the tourist crap said. The wild is dying, they said. This planet is dying. You remembered how it was in the news, how the planet had 12 years left or something like that. So you want me to recycle more then? It was kind of underwhelming. The first time you'd come to know a spirit or a god, and they just wanted you to sort your paper and your plastic better. Among other things. Promise to respect this stuff. Watch over it, and to always keep it in mind in all that you do. Leave no trace of your presence in the wild. Never take more than you need, and replenish what you can. Respect the balance and the role all living things have to play in maintaining this balance. If enough make this promise, the mountain can heal. They offered their hand to you. Is it a deal? It's a promise, he answered as he checked his application. A promise that you keep.